I'm 64 years old, and if you had told me 5 years ago that getting remarried would nearly cost me everything I'd spent 3 decades building, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. And the only reason I still have my vineyard, my winery, and my freedom today is because when I married Richard Barnes, I made one critical decision. I never told him or his 3 adult children that the estate we lived on wasn't just family property, it was mine. All mine. Every acre, every vine, every bottle. Let me back up. My name is Catherine Morrison, though everyone calls me Kathy. I bought my first 5 acres in Sonoma Valley in 1989, when I was 34 years old. I was a single mother working as a real estate agent, and people thought I was crazy. A woman on her own, buying raw land in wine country? The bank nearly laughed me out of the office, but I had a vision, and more importantly, I had grit. I started small, planted my first Pinot Noir vines with my own hands. My daughter Emily was 7, and she'd help me after school, her little fingers learning to tie the vines to the posts. It took 3 years before those vines produced anything worth pressing. 3 years of working my real estate job during the day and working the land every evening and weekend. 3 years of people in town taking bets on when I'd give up and sell. But I didn't give up. By 1995, I had 15 acres planted and my first vintage bottled. By 2000, I'd expanded to 50 acres and opened a small tasting room. By 2010, Morrison Estate Winery was on the map. 75 acres of prime Sonoma Valley terroir, a beautiful stone winery building, a tasting room that seated 40, and wines that were getting written up in Wine Spectator. Do you know what it takes for a single woman to build something like that? The 16-hour days, the bank loans I had to personally guarantee, the harvest seasons when I was out there at 2 in the morning checking on the crush, the late payments I juggled to keep the lights on, every single decision, every risk, every victory, that was me, mine. By the time I was 60, Emily had graduated from UC Davis with a degree in viticulture and was working at a winery in Napa. She didn't want to take over the family business. She wanted to make her own path, and I respected that. My estate had grown to 150 acres. The property was worth at least $8 million, probably more. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable, secure, proud of what I'd built, and I was lonely. My first husband, Emily's father, had left when she was 3. I dated here and there over the years, but nothing serious. I'd been too busy building my dream to focus on romance. But at 60, with Emily living her own life and the business running smoothly with the help of my incredible vineyard manager Carlos, I found myself rattling around in my farmhouse alone. That's when I met Richard at a charity wine auction in San Francisco. He was 67, a retired investment banker, recently widowed, tall, silver-haired, charming in that polished way that comes from decades of expensive suits and country club memberships. He bid on a case of my 2015 Reserve Pinot, and when he won, he came up to introduce himself. "I've heard wonderful things about Morrison Estate," he said, shaking my hand. "I'd love to visit your tasting room sometime." He visited the following weekend. Then the weekend after that. By the 3rd visit, we were having dinner together. By the 6th month, we were talking about the future. Richard was attentive, thoughtful. He brought me first editions of books about winemaking. He planned romantic getaways to Carmel and Mendocino. He listened when I talked about the challenges of running a winery in an industry still dominated by men. He seemed fascinated by my success story. Looking back, I can see exactly what I missed. But at the time, I was just a 60-year-old woman who'd been alone for most of her adult life, falling in love. We got engaged after 8 months. He proposed at sunset on my west vineyard, the one with the view of the valley, with a ring that must have cost $20,000. I said yes with tears in my eyes. That's when the questions started. Not from Richard at first, but from his children. He had 3, Derek, 42, who worked in finance like his father, Patricia, 39, a real estate developer, and Mitchell, 35, who did something vague in tech consulting. They all lived in the Bay Area, and Richard was close with them. The first time they came to visit the estate, 2 weeks after the engagement, Patricia walked through my farmhouse like she was conducting an appraisal. "How many acres is this property?" she asked. What's the annual production? Who handles distribution? Do you have any business partners? I kept my answers vague. It's a family operation, I said. Everything's been in the Morrison name for over 30 years. Derek wanted to know about financials. What kind of revenue does a boutique winery like this generate? What are your margins? How's the debt structured? I smiled politely. We do well enough. It's not really about the money for me. It's about the craft. Mitchell asked about my will. Actually asked about my will. Since you and Dad are getting married, have you thought about estate planning? It would be smart to get everything organized, for tax purposes. I was 60 years old, healthy as a horse. I looked at Richard, waiting for him to tell his son that was inappropriate. But Richard just squeezed my hand and said, "Mitchell's right, darling. We should both make sure our affairs are in order. It's the responsible thing to do." Emily flew up from Napa for the wedding. The night before, as we were having wine on the porch of the farmhouse, she said, "Mom, are you sure about this? Those kids of his give me a weird vibe." "They're just protective of their father," I told her. "He's all they have left since their mother died." "Yeah, but the way Patricia was looking at the winery building, the tasting room, the barrels, Mom, she was assessing value. I know that look. I see it from developers all the time." I waved her off. "You're being paranoid. Did you get a prenup?" "Emily, Mom, please tell me you got a prenup." I had. My attorney, Linda Chen, who I'd known since my real estate days, had insisted. Richard had seemed a little hurt when I brought it up, but he'd signed without too much fuss. The prenup was clear. Assets acquired before the marriage remained separate property. The estate, the winery, the business, all mine. What I didn't tell anyone, not Emily, not Linda, not even Richard, was what I did tell Richard and his children about the property. I lied. Not a big lie, just a strategic omission. I told them the estate was cooperative family property that had been in the Morrison name for generations. I implied there were other stakeholders. I made it sound like I was the manager, the operator, but not the sole owner. When they asked direct questions, I deflected. "It's complicated," or "there are family trusts involved," or "my attorney handles all of that." Was it dishonest? Maybe. But something in my gut told me to protect this information. Some instinct I'd developed over 30 years of fighting to build and keep my business told me that Richard's children seeing me as a wealthy widow with millions in real estate might not be a good thing. And oh, was I right. The wedding was small, intimate. We got married at the estate, of course, under an arch covered in grapevines. Emily was my maid of honor. Richard's 3 children stood as his attendants, all smiling, all gracious. Patricia even hugged me and called me Mom, which should have been sweet but somehow felt performative. We didn't go on a honeymoon. Harvest season was approaching, and I couldn't leave Carlos to handle it alone. Richard said he understood. He moved into the farmhouse, bringing his furniture, his books, his golf clubs. We settled into married life. For the first year, it was good. Richard seemed content to play golf at the club in Santa Rosa, to host his children for Sunday dinners, to sit on the porch in the evenings with a glass of my wine and watch the sun set over the vines. He didn't interfere with the business. He didn't ask too many questions. He was just there. Companionship. But in year 2, things shifted. It started with Derek. He came to visit alone one Saturday and asked if he could take a look at the books for the winery. "Just from a financial planning perspective," he said. "Dad mentioned you might want to expand distribution, and I have some connections in that world." I'd never mentioned wanting to expand distribution. "Thanks, Derek, but Carlos and I have the business side handled. We're happy with our current distributors." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Kathy, you're family now. We want to help. That's what families do." Then Patricia started showing up with real estate agents. "Just to get the property appraised," she said, "for insurance purposes. You're probably underinsured, and with climate change affecting California, fire insurance is crucial." I already had excellent insurance. I told her so. "But have you had the land appraised recently? I'm seeing comparable properties in Sonoma going for 12, even 15 million. You should know what you're sitting on." I asked her to leave. Mitchell was subtler. He'd come over for dinner and casually mention how his tech consulting was going. Then he'd say things like, "You know, a lot of wineries are moving into e-commerce and direct-to-consumer sales. I could help you build out a platform. family discount, of course. I already had a website. I already did direct sales. But the most disturbing thing was Richard. He started asking me to sign things. "Just updating my life insurance beneficiaries," he'd say, sliding a form across the kitchen table. Standard stuff. I'd read every word. Half the time, the documents had nothing to do with his life insurance. They were financial powers of attorney, property transfer authorizations, papers that would give him legal authority over my accounts. "Richard, I'm not signing this," I said more than once. "Why not? Don't you trust me?" "We're married, Catherine. It's not about trust. I'm just not signing documents I don't fully understand." He'd get cold then, distant, wouldn't speak to me for days. And then came the phone calls. I started noticing he'd take calls outside, walking down between the vine rows where I couldn't hear. When I asked who it was, he'd say, "Just Derek," or "Just Patricia," or "Nobody important." 3 years into the marriage, I came home from a meeting with my distributor in San Francisco to find Richard, Derek, and Patricia in my office in the winery building. They had my filing cabinet open. They had papers spread across my desk. "What are you doing?" I asked. They all jumped like they'd been caught. Patricia quickly started gathering papers. Derek closed the filing cabinet. Richard smiled that smooth smile. "We were just looking for the insurance papers, darling." Patricia was right. "We really should update your policy. Those are private business documents. You had no right to be in here." "Catherine, I'm your husband. We don't have secrets in a marriage." That night, I called Linda. "I think something's wrong," I told her. "I need you to run a property check on my estate. Make sure everything's still in my name. All the filings are correct." "Kathy, what's going on?" "I don't know. But I have a bad feeling." She called me back 3 days later. Her voice was tight. "Kathy, someone's been filing documents with the county. Transfer deeds, partnership agreements, papers that would give Richard and his children ownership stakes in Morrison Estate Winery." My blood went cold. "What? How is that possible?" "I never signed anything like that. The signatures look like yours. But Kathy, these are forgeries, obvious forgeries once you compare them to your actual signature. Whoever did this wasn't even good at it. Can they do that? Can they just file fake documents?" "They can file them. Whether they hold up in court is another matter. But Kathy, this is serious. This is fraud. This is a crime." I felt sick. I sat down on the porch steps, the phone pressed to my ear, looking out at the vines I'd planted with my own hands 30 years ago. "What do I do?" "We need to file a police report. We need to get an injunction. And Kathy, you need to confront Richard." But I didn't confront Richard. Not yet. Because I did something else first. I called an old friend of mine, a private investigator named Tom Reeves, who I'd worked with back in my real estate days when I needed background checks on property deals. "Tom, I need you to look into someone for me. Richard Barnes. Everything. Financial history, criminal record, and especially, I need you to find out about his first wife, how she died. What happened to her estate?" It took Tom 2 weeks. When he came back, he had a file 3 inches thick. Richard's first wife, Margaret, had died 4 years ago. But before she died, she'd transferred her entire estate, a $4 million home in Pacific Heights, her investment accounts, everything, into Richard's name. The transfer had happened 6 months before her death. She'd had early onset Alzheimer's. And here's where it got really dark. Margaret's sister had tried to contest the transfer, claiming Richard had taken advantage of Margaret's diminished mental capacity. But Richard had documents, power of attorney, transfer papers, all signed by Margaret, though the sister claimed they were forgeries, or had been signed when Margaret didn't understand what she was signing. The case had been settled out of court. The sister got a small payout. Richard kept everything. There was more. Derek had been sued by a former business partner for financial fraud. Patricia had lost her real estate license in Oregon over ethical violations. Mitchell had been fired from 2 consulting firms for undisclosed reasons. Tom looked at me across the table at the coffee shop where we met. "Kathy, this is a family of grifters. They've done this before. They're doing it again with you." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "What do I do?" "You get out. You divorce him. You press charges for the forgery. You protect yourself." But here's the thing. I'd spent 30 years building Morrison Estate. These people thought they could just walk in and take it, forge some papers and steal what I'd spent 3 decades creating? No, I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure they could never do this to anyone else again. I went back to Linda. I want to build a case. A real case. Not just for divorce, for fraud, for attempted theft, for forgery. I want criminal charges. All of them. Linda looked at me carefully. Kathy, that's going to be ugly. That's going to be public. Your winery's reputation. My winery's reputation is based on the quality of my wine and the integrity of my name. These people tried to steal from me. I want everyone to know it. We built the case methodically. Linda brought in a forensic accountant who went through every financial record, every filing, every document. We found more forged signatures. We found email chains between Derek and Patricia discussing how to maximize the value extraction from the estate. We found text messages from Richard to his children, strategizing about how to handle me. We also found something else. Richard had done this not just to his first wife, but to his second wife before Margaret, a woman named Helen who died in a fall at her vacation home. She'd also transferred her property to Richard shortly before her death. Her adult children had tried to contest it but had been blocked by the same attorneys Richard used for Margaret's case. 2 dead wives. 2 estates transferred right before they died. And now a third wife. Me. Who they were trying to get property from. I wasn't dying. I wasn't sick. I was healthy and sharp and 64 years old. But if I'd been just a little more trusting, a little less careful, who knows what might have happened? Linda filed all the documents with the district attorney. We had enough for criminal fraud charges against Derek and Patricia. For Richard, we were building a case for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. But before any of that went public, I wanted my confrontation. I planned it carefully. I told Richard I wanted to have a family dinner, all of his children, Emily, and a few friends to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. He was thrilled. He thought I'd finally come around to being a real family. The dinner was set for a Saturday evening at the estate. I had Carlos set up tables on the patio overlooking the vines. I hired a caterer. I made sure my best wines were poured. Richard, Derek, Patricia, and Mitchell arrived dressed in their best, all smiles. Emily arrived with her boyfriend, giving me a questioning look. I'd briefed her earlier, and she was barely holding it together. And then my other guests arrived. Linda Chen, my attorney. Tom Reeves, my private investigator. Detective Sarah Martinez from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. And 2 more people Richard wasn't expecting. Margaret's sister, Joan, and Helen's daughter, Catherine. Richard's face went white when he saw them walk onto the patio. "What is this?" he asked. "This is a family dinner," I said calmly. "And these people? They're family too. Joan is your late wife Margaret's sister. Catherine is your late wife Helen's daughter. I thought it was time we all got to know each other." Derek stood up. "This is ridiculous. We're leaving." "Sit down, Derek," Detective Martinez said. "You're not going anywhere." Patricia looked like she was going to be sick. I stood at the head of the table, a glass of my 2018 reserve in my hand, looking at each of them. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I asked. "Did you honestly believe you could forge documents, file fake transfer papers, and I wouldn't notice?" Richard tried to bluster. "Catherine, I don't know what you think. I think you and your children are thieves. I think you've done this before. Twice. Margaret and Helen transferred their estates to you right before they died. How convenient. Those were legitimate transfers. They wanted me to have... They had Alzheimer's and a traumatic brain injury, respectively. They couldn't consent. You manipulated them." Joan spoke up, her voice shaking. "He forged my sister's signature. I've been saying it for years." Catherine added, "My mother was terrified of him at the end. She told me she didn't want to sign anything, but he kept bringing papers to the hospital." I looked at Richard. At Derek. At Patricia. At Mitchell. "You thought I was just another elderly woman you could rob. But here's what you didn't know. I built this estate from nothing. I fought banks, droughts, fires, recessions, and an entire industry that didn't want women at the table. Do you really think I wouldn't fight you?" Linda stepped forward with a folder. "These are the forged documents you filed with the county. We've had them analyzed. The signatures are fake. We have evidence of your email chains discussing the fraud. And we have statements from your father's previous victims. Detective Martinez added, Richard Barnes, Derek Barnes, Patricia Barnes, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. The next hour was chaos. Miranda rights, handcuffs, Mitchell claiming he didn't know anything about it, throwing his siblings under the bus, Patricia crying, Derek threatening lawsuits, Richard, silent, staring at me with pure hatred. As they were being loaded into police cars, Richard finally spoke. You vindictive bitch. I loved you. I walked right up to him, close enough that only he could hear me. No, you didn't. You loved my property. But here's the thing, Richard, it was never yours to love. Every vine, every bottle, every acre. I bought it. I built it. I earned it. And you couldn't take it from me because I knew exactly what I had. And I protected it. He was taken away. The criminal case took 8 months. Derek and Patricia pleaded guilty to fraud and forgery in exchange for reduced sentences. They each got 2 years. Richard went to trial and was convicted of elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and, after further investigation into Margaret and Helen's deaths, 2 counts of suspicious circumstance that triggered new investigations. He got 12 years. At 67, that was essentially a life sentence. The divorce was finalized 3 months after the arrests. The prenup held. Richard got nothing. His legal fees bankrupted him. Mitchell, who cooperated with prosecutors, got probation and was ordered to testify against his father and siblings. Today, I'm 69 years old. Morrison Estate Winery is thriving. Emily decided to come back and work with me. Turns out watching her mother fight for what was hers inspired her to want to be part of the legacy. Carlos is still my vineyard manager, and he just celebrated 20 years with me. I never remarried. I don't think I will. But I tell this story to anyone who'll listen. Especially women. Especially older women. Especially women who've built something with their own hands. When I got married at 60, I made a choice not to tell my husband or his children that the estate we lived on was solely mine. I made them believe it was family property or cooperative ownership or something vague and complicated. Some people might say I should have trusted Richard, that if I didn't trust him, I shouldn't have married him. But here's what I learned. Protecting yourself isn't about distrust. It's about recognizing that the person you love today might not be the person you thought they were tomorrow. It's about understanding that your achievements, your property, your life's work, those things are yours. They don't become community property because you fall in love. They don't become negotiable because you want companionship. And sometimes, the simple act of keeping a secret, of not revealing your full hand, is what saves everything you've worked for. I kept my secret for 3 years. Those 3 years gave me time to see who Richard and his children really were, time to notice the red flags, time to build evidence, time to protect myself. If I'd told them from day one that I was the sole owner of an $8 million estate, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe they would have pushed harder, faster. Maybe I wouldn't have noticed the manipulation until it was too late. Maybe I'd be like Margaret and Helen, stripped of everything I'd built, a cautionary tale instead of a survivor. But I didn't tell them. And that secret saved me. My advice to anyone entering a late-life marriage, or any marriage really, know what you have. Know what it's worth. Protect it legally. And don't feel guilty about keeping some cards close to your chest until you're absolutely certain of who you're dealing with. Because love is beautiful, but naivety is dangerous. And your life's work? That's not something you gamble with. Not ever. I still make wine. I still walk my vineyard rows at sunset, touching the vines I planted 30 years ago. I still taste every vintage, still make every blending decision, still welcome guests to my tasting room with pride. The difference is, now when I pour someone a glass of Morrison Estate Reserve, when they ask me about the property, I tell them the truth. This is my estate. I bought it, I built it, I own it. Every vine you see, mine. Every bottle, mine. Every acre, mine. And then I smile and add, and it's going to stay that way. Because I was never their victim. I was never their mark. I was never their elderly target. I was their reckoning. And I'm still here, on my land, living my life, making my wine, exactly as I always have been. Alone? Maybe. But free? Absolutely. And that's worth everything. I'm 64 years old, and if you had told me 5